Cette conférence va maintenant être enregistrée.
Webinar series. Oh, we are getting some. Yeah, we've got Hungarian participants and some participants. Actually, quite a lot of participants from France as well. Okay, so we are here today on behalf of KÖVET Association from Hungary, and also on behalf of the Association Bilan Carbone from France, from Paris. Welcome, everyone. And let's see what we will cover today. So first of all, we will introduce the two associations, the Hungarian KÖVET Association and the Association Bilan Carbone from France. And as you can see, we've got the topics listed here, the topics that you could already see when you registered for this webinar. Also, after the topics are covered, we will have the Mentimeter voting. We will give all the details for you in course when it comes up. And please save your questions until the end of the webinar because you will be able to ask them in the chat box. Well, actually, you can already start writing your questions during the course of the presentations, but we will come back to them at the end of the webinar. The webinar is recorded, and we will share the PPT slides, the presentation slides with you after the webinar. So questions, comments, please in the chat box. Thank you for your attention. And now our presenters today, we have Professor Diana Urge-Borsát. She's a professor at the Department of Environmental Sciences and Policy at the Central European University in Hungary, and she's also vice chair of the Working Group 3 for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and she's also a member of the Academia Europaea. We also have Katalin Herner, she's the executive director of KÖVET Association, and we have got Zsoria Tovogu, she's the methodology officer from the Association Bilan Carbone. Thank you. And now I'm giving the word to Ms. Katalin Herner on behalf of KÖVET Association.
Hello, good morning. Welcome from Hungary. I would like to introduce you one of the organizers of this free webinars, the KÖVET Association for Sustainable Economies. We are celebrating this year the 25th anniversary of foundation of our NGO. Our main activities are raise awareness and we spread environmental management, CSR activities and CSR tools, sustainable economy, mostly among companies. We have company members in Hungary, and we are also a member of INEM and the Global Footprint Network, and also a partner organization of the GRI. We have a project, international and national projects like LIFE, Erasmus Plus, Horizon 2020, and the IKI project we had. And we are mostly organizing events, nowadays webinars like this. We like conferences, of course, personal conferences, but these days it's not easy to organize them. We have company visits, workshops, and summer universities in Hungary and in Europe as well. I would like to show you one more slide about our main activities and main issues. You can see that we are doing about sustainability, like carbon footprint calculation, SCA, green office, or we are dealing also with economic paradigm change or strategic sustainability audit at the companies. So these are all we are going to, or we are dealing with, and we had a connection to ABC since 3 years ago when we had a common LIFE project about carbon footprint calculation. And nowadays we can see that the companies are mostly interested, more and more interested in carbon footprint calculation, and they have several questions. That's why we saw that we have this webinar series of free webinars, and this is the first. We would like to introduce you the climate change, the mitigation, and why a company should deal with the carbon footprint calculation. Thank you.
And now we are giving the word to Ms. Zsoria to present or to introduce us to their association in France, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. We'll just open my camera. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sound is okay?
Yes.
Okay, I think the camera will work in a few minutes, but I could start. I would like to thank KÖVET for this opportunity. To introduce myself quickly, I'm Joël Touagui, product officer working in the association Bilan Carbone. The association Bilan Carbone was created in 2011 at the initiative of ADEME, so the ex-ADEME, the Ecological Transition Agency, previously a French Environment and Energy Management Agency, with the mission of developing and disseminating the bilan carbone. So the bilan carbone is a method for greenhouse gas emissions accounting and reduction, and it's currently the most commonly used method in France. The association's purpose is to spread its expertise in terms of carbon accounting and environmental footprints and low carbon transitions at international level. IBC is used to train and raise awareness of all kinds of organizations or stakeholders, from organizations, company, students, and so on, in adapting tools and methodology. And other missions of the IBC is to raise awareness and build expertise. And for that, we organize public events like this webinar, for example, in partnership with KÖVET. And to give access to information, we participate in different working groups and on research projects too, to spread carbon accounting and to promote low carbon transitions.
Thank you, Joariatu. Okay, so the first topic will be climate change, and I'm giving the word to Ms. Katalin Herner on behalf of KÖVET Association.
Thank you. We thought that it's not really needed to talk a lot about the climate change, because I'm sure that all of you who are attending to this webinar is aware that climate change is a fact. It's not something in the future, somewhere in the future, but it's already these days. We can see the causes, and we can see the effects of climate change. You can see here, when you will get the presentation, two little videos which I suggest you to see, because they are really interesting, and only it's difficult to share it, because then the sound wouldn't be good. So I prefer to skip it, and then you can see it later on. So there are evidences for climate change, and there are consequences we have to face with. And for that, in 2015, the Paris Agreement had launched, and 195 countries joined the Paris Agreement, and have the common aim to reduce the carbon emission, and to maintain the 1.5 degree global temperature rise. So this is the aim, but we have to reach. And there are several actions about it, how to reach them. For example, one is the climate action. Climate action is one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the 13 goals among the 17 ones. And we can say this is a very important goal. Also, the next one is more about that. There are some facts, like that the last year was the second warmest year ever recorded, for example, and that there are several natural disasters which are caused by the climate change. For example, the flood, the sudden rainfalls, and the droughts, and these kind of things. And several million people will and already suffer from these causes and these effects around the world. You can also see that there are some facts which are connected to the COVID-19 virus, and because of this, the Earth Overshoot Day had moved this year 3 weeks later, which is, we could see that it's a good side effect of the virus. But in fact, the experts warn us that it's only a temporary trend, and if you don't take certain actions, that it will, the next year it will be also again in July and not in August as it is now. We will see some data about the renewable energy, that worldwide the renewable energy percent is higher and it's rising, but it's also it can't be enough, the renewable energy rise, as we have to reduce the total amount of energy consumption and the total amount of energy generation as well. You can see here the data for the last, let's say, 40 years. The renewable energy consumption and the generation is rising very rapidly. And you can see here, and also in your surrounding, I'm sure everybody can see that the renewable energy is going up and up, but it's not enough. We have to reduce the total amount of energy consumption. You can see here some other data about the temperature anomalies, which are going higher and higher each year, and also the exact data about the CO2 parts per million, so the CO2 concentration in the air, how it's going upper and upper each year. And I have the exact data from some days ago. This part per million measurement had taken at Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, and you can see here that in this year is the highest ppm amount of CO2 in the air, concentration in the air. On the same date last year it was 2.82 ppm less. So the 1 year change is something like 0.69%. And you can see at the left the other data from the last previous years. So it's also a fact, you can see, and it's also a fact that the CO2 emission rising is causing the climate change mostly. Okay. Some more words about this Earth Overshoot Day. The Global Footprint Network, led by Mattis Wackernagel and their international expert team, calculated this data and calculating the overshoot day year by year, not only globally but also for countries. And you can see here that this year the Earth Overshoot Day was on the 22nd of August, the date when the humanity has used all the resources that our Earth can generate in 1 year. It is a very difficult and complicated calculation behind it, of course, but it's a calculation that made year by year. And the last year, the 2019, it was the 29th of July. So the COVID-19 virus helped us, if we can say, to gain these 3 weeks because the carbon emission reduction was something like 14.5% less compared to the previous year, and the ecological footprint was smaller than the last year by 9.3%. But we have to mention that it's only a temporary change. If we do the same economy after the COVID, then it come back, and it will be also again in July. We are sure in it. So we have to take certain actions to avoid it. If you are interested in more details about it, you can see these 2 links. One is at KÖVET link, and one is at the GFN and overshootday.org link. So thank you.
Yes, and our next presenter will be Ms. Diana Ürge-Forsatz, Professor Diana Ürge-Forsatz, and thank you.
Yeah, we can give you the share.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Because right now it's disallowed.
Yes. Please.
Okay.
Sorry, Atu, can you
Yes, I
please
have
add?
named Diana as the new presenter. Is it working, Diana?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Perfect.
I just have to somehow be able to see my presentation. That's the only thing. And I don't do
Okay.
that because without that I can't. Well, anyway, let me try to.
We can see your presentation now.
I know, but I want to start it, but exactly the icons are there. But anyway, I'm going to. I hope this will work. Yes. Okay. I still don't see my. Do I put- Okay, well, anyway, I try this way. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this prestigious invitation and your extremely important seminar, and extremely important that we take action on this, as already mentioned by the previous speakers. And why? Sorry. Yes. Okay, it's working, hopefully. Why am I saying that? As everybody is now busy with our pandemic, also in both in France and Hungary, we are experiencing very severe the second wave, and we could tend to forget about this, especially that the previous speaker said, well, anyway, the emissions have gone down, so why worry about that? The problem is that, as this figure illustrates very well, that we think that the recession which is generated by the COVID crisis is very significant, but in reality, even the Economist magazine here, what it warns about, that this is all nothing as compared to the recession, that both the health and the economic problems that are going to come as a result of climate change. So we are going to face a much more significant problem with that. So how do I go on? Yes, I'm going. So what I'm going to present now, a couple of figures, because I was asked to discuss the global carbon budget. And based on that, what I want to show you is a couple of pieces of information from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report on global warming of 1.5 degrees. As I was introduced, I'm a vice chair in the IPCC, and I participated in the preparation of this report, which was actually requested exactly in Paris during the COP, where the Paris Agreement was approved. And within the Paris Agreement, the parties asked the IPCC to prepare this report, because that was the first time actually when politics ran significantly ahead of science, when you agreed that we should aim for actually 1.5 degrees warming, cap warming at 1.5 degrees as compared to pre-industrial global mean temperature levels. We had no idea that it could actually be done. In fact, most of the scientists were skeptical that it could be done. I was in Paris and with my colleagues in the IPCC, and they all ran around in panic when they saw that the parties are putting this into the agreement, that we should prepare this report. They all said, come on, this train is gone, it's impossible, forget about this. But then as we were starting to work on this, actually, let's see what we found and whether and how this goal can actually be achieved. So the reason why, of course, everybody is worried about that, because you know very well that emissions have been increasing extremely steeply and very much in the last couple of decades. And what you see here is the global emissions in gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And you see here, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Copenhagen Accords, and all the Kyoto Protocol, all the various climate agreements, but you see that virtually nothing has changed this enormously upward trend, except for a little bit of temporary plateau at the top. So, of course, then it was quite concerning when the models showed that this is what we have to do. In order to reach 1.5 degrees, this is what we have to do with emissions. So basically, we have to just dive nose down and free fall with emissions and go to zero absolutely zero towards the middle of the century. So certainly when anyone sees that all our efforts done nothing and virtually nothing, and we have to do this, one would tend to say, well, just, you know, throw your hands into the air and this is impossible, goodbye everybody. Now, that's how most of us actually started this report. But as the researchers were doing more research and we were doing more modeling, it actually turned out that, in fact, this is not impossible. Not only not impossible, and what you see here is actually the real model runs of the same line that I've just shown, with real macroeconomic models. So real macroeconomic models into which we put different policies, into which we put different technologies. What most of this, I have to say, most of these are existing technologies. And it turned out that actually it's not only not impossible, but every single line in this gray cloud is one different way of getting to Rome, one different way of getting to 1.5 degrees. So, so basically what the report concluded that, yes, it is still possible. Well, at least when the report was written, which it was published, what is in 2018, it still was possible to reach this very ambitious climate goal. And not only is it possible, but there are many different ways. We still have choices. None of them is easy at all, but it's still possible. And the report also showed that it is not going to wreck the economy. It is not about, okay, let's shut down. It's not about what happened this March. It's not like, you know, we all go back to the caves and we are not moving around anywhere. So, but let's actually concretely go to the actual carbon budget, because this is what I was asked to talk about. So what is the carbon budget? It's a very convenient, and sorry, apologies from those who are very familiar with this term, but this is a very convenient and very practical term to translate the very complex climate science into tangible figures of how much can we still emit. Because all of us live on budgets, right? You're all companies, you all have budgets, and you understand that language and that way of thinking very well. So how does the budget come through? So budget comes from the fact that we can, basically the greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide that we emit, will stay in the atmosphere for a very long period. Therefore, what we emit in the next couple of decades will stay there for a long time, but what we have been emitting since the Industrial Revolution is more or less staying in the atmosphere. So that's why a certain level of warming belongs to a certain level of total emissions. So that means, if you have a bit more mathematical mind, then total emissions mean that basically the area under the annual emissions curve. So when we talk about remaining carbon budget, what we calculate is the remaining area under under the emissions curves. When we talk about climate neutrality, then we try to talk about this area minus the area until the negative curve, because mind you, here zero is here, which is not very to overemphasize, but zero, we do have to reach zero, as I mentioned, around the middle of the century. However, and I don't want to get into this too much this time, that at this point, many of the scientists are extremely concerned about the word net, and because actually all of these scenarios which go very deep here and which are a bit more relaxed at the beginning, so nowadays rely very heavily on the technology so-called bioenergy combined carbon capture and storage, which is a technology not yet really used at the mass scale, and also that requires extremely massive afforestation of our land area, and there are many other concerns about biodiversity and so on. So most experts would prefer if we choose pathways that do not rely heavily on the net part, but rather choose the lines that actually go just a little bit under zero at in the second half of the century, and sometimes we translate this also this big net or offsetting or living well now and then paying or asking our children to pay for that enormous negative emissions. Kind of, if your doctor tells you that you have to go on a diet and you say that, oh sure, I'll just pay my children to go on a diet for me, but I still stay on the same sugary or fatty diet that I'm having right now. So having said that, let's actually look at the actual numbers. So by 2017, because that's where until the data collection finished for the report, we have used approximately 2,200 gigatons of carbon dioxide from our total carbon budget, which is means that that's how much we actually emitted. If we know that current emissions are about, or at least they were roughly at 42 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, then we can calculate our remaining carbon budget. However, what was new in this report, and this is why it's important to understand that it's not very easy to give one number on the global carbon budget. And I'm sorry to say that we scientists always talk about uncertainty and confidence intervals and all these things that you actual concrete decision makers can't really do anything with. But this number is particularly if you ask us what's the carbon budget, we have to ask, okay, yes, I'll tell you, but tell me first, which temperature do you want me to use, and so on and so on. So there are many ifs when we give a number for this. For example, what we revealed in the 1.5 degree special report was that the choice of the measure of the global temperature is particularly important for the estimated remaining carbon budget. Because if you use global mean surface air temperature, as we used in the 5th assessment report, then the remaining carbon budget is between roughly 580 to 450, again, depending on another question is, okay, how sure do you want to be? Do you want us to have a 50% probability to hit our temperature target, or a 2/3 probability to hit the temperature target? If you want to use global mean surface temperature for measuring this 1.5 degree, then we have a little bit more relaxed carbon budget, a little bit higher for these two values that I just cited. So if you calculate these different values, and at current rates, which was 2018 rates of emissions, well, then it gave 10 to 18 degrees year window to decarbonize our economies in order to stay within the carbon budget. But unfortunately, since then, 2 years passed on, and with that, so we roughly have now 8 to 16-year window. Well, this was probably the reason why a lot of the press referred to the "we have 12 years left" headline that got very famous about the report, but it's actually not 12, but this window, and it assumes that nothing changes in this time, and if emissions go up, then actually this is lower, and if we do manage to reduce our emissions, then it will be more time. So, and I'm sorry to say, I'm not going to go exactly through this figure, but I'm sorry to say that even these numbers actually are still more uncertain. And you know, for example, we still have a lot of uncertainties in the climate response to both carbon dioxide and non-carbon dioxide emissions. And this gives another 400 gigatons of uncertainty to the climate, the carbon budget, which is, as you've seen, either it could be almost the whole of our remaining carbon budget, depending on how we calculate, or at least 50%. We also don't know that precisely the level of historic warming. That gives another, and so on and so on. The point is that this figure is, the total figure is quite a lot of scientific uncertainty. So that means that although these are, you know, useful rules of thumb, that, but it's still fairly most calculations. We don't really have more than 16 years left with the current emissions, and 7 years left with the more stringent. The point is we have very little time left, and in fact, a lot of the recent papers this year have warned us that actually we may have already committed the climate to warm 1.5 degrees, since the warming has been stronger than we anticipated. We already have seen very high temperatures this year. So basically, I could say that based on the previous information, the point is it's not global. It's not.
I'm sorry, Professor, sorry to disturb you. I just would like to ask everybody to please switch off your microphones, because we can't properly hear the professor giving her presentation. Thank you for your cooperation. Sorry, Professor. Back to you.
Thank you. Yes, so basically the rule of thumb is that it's best to reduce your carbon footprint to as little as possible. Because it's so uncertain, but it's definitely very little. So, so I think that the best answer to give for how much is our carbon budget left is to say that it's very little. Now, but then let's come back to the excellent presentation just before me. And for example, it was pointed out that Earth Overshoot Day has moved quite a lot this year. So there was also a figure mentioned that our carbon was decreased by 15%. So a lot of people may tend to think, oh, that's relax now. Perhaps the COVID crisis bought us some time, and it's not that urgent. Now let's look into this. How much has the crisis? How much time has the crisis bought us? How much did it help? Now, this is the figure of how much the emissions decreased, or the video, how much the emissions decreased in the first, you see in the top here, the date, and the blue is the darker the blue, the more the emissions decreased. As you see at the top, it was about 18% reduction in March globally. Yes, globally, a lot of countries have decreased a lot their emissions for a short period. However, what we want to point out that this is actually not going to make any difference, unfortunately, in our warming. And let me show that with actual data to underline that. And even our big sacrifices under the altar of COVID-19 will not actually fix the climate basically at all. But let's get to the details. It's true that global carbon emissions have fallen more than basically ever before. What this shows is the emissions in the previous century and also this century. And you see that even the Great Depression, even the Second World War, even the two oil shocks have not reduced emissions by so much as happened during the pandemic. And here you see the annual change, so basically the derivative of this curve, the annual change in emissions, and you see that even the financial crisis of 2007 was, which we perceive as the major crisis, is nothing as compared to the emissions decrease that we expect this year. Right now, the emissions are, but of course they are still uncertain, that globally it will change by 4 to 8% globally, the carbon emissions, not 15, that's a temporary decrease. Total annual decrease is more between 4 and 8%, although it's probably will be closer to the 8%. But anyway, even so, this is again, if we zoom into the end of this curve, this is by far the largest fall ever, 6 times bigger than the drop caused by the financial crisis, which was actually just a drop for one single year. And as you see, after the the crisis, it was almost overcompensated because it was almost a very significant increase not experienced ever before in percentage term. However, let's look at what this will actually do to our climate. These are the Mauna Loa, this is the killing curve that was shown before. And let's just zoom in to the last little part of this curve, and let's see how much actually this has changed. So this is what if we zoom into the last three humps of this curve. And unfortunately, the models tell us that even this very significant drop in emissions for a couple of months, and even this big annual drop, is actually not going to do any noticeable change in our actual climate carbon concentration, carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. And we don't yet have the actual consistent data. The 411 was for September, but it's depends on how you measure and where and what you include and so on. So I don't want to by myself put this this data point on this curve. But the point is that actually we are not going to notice at all this drop in emissions. In fact, in total, in fact, what we observe this year, we keep observing temperature records all around the world. We know that the highest temperature on the planet has also been, surface temperature has also been exceeded, and many temperature and climate records and even concentration records have been exceeded. So, and this is what we see, that this is how our emissions dropped in April. Yes, they were very significant, but they rebounded very fast. Unfortunately, I haven't found a more recent analysis that would break this down very much. Still, at this point, I say it's very important that you listen to the next slide, because despite all of this, what I want to posit and what we want to say is that we still say, and I still state, that still the COVID crisis is a historic opportunity for us to solve climate change. We never had this opportunity, but it is not because of this huge drop in emissions. But let me show why, just briefly go through, because I don't want to take all the time, but why do we think that we never had such an opportunity to fast forward the energy and climate transition, the energy transition that we need to solve climate change? First of all, we have seen that it was the highest emitting industries that were in the largest trouble. We know that oil prices went to negative for a certain period of time. We know that many oil companies were in trouble. Many of them have to, even though the stock market is almost back to normal and oil prices are not quite back to normal, but recovered to a certain extent, still a lot of oil explorations and recoveries and oil investments had to be scaled back, and many oil fields which are less profitable are perhaps going to be sold. So a lot of such processes have been started, which anyway we would have had to do. But when the economy is going great, when the companies are going great, when their employees are getting nice paychecks and nice benefits, then it's very difficult to say to a company, look, I'm sorry, you just have to kind of not exist. However, when there is anyway a crisis, anyway they're laying off employees, anyway they're selling off assets, then it's easier to consider, well, perhaps this is the time, just we don't have to do it more, just don't do it back. Don't put them on the respirator, on the ventilator, and don't resuscitate the dead body. So, and this is the same or similar with aviation, with the cruise industry, with some of the car industry, and so on. Also, interestingly, the crisis has shown that the biggest change in energy demand was related to the fossil fuels, not only oil. Coal also suffered, actually coal suffered the most. Coal, oil, and also natural gas suffered very significant, whereas the, renewable energies have actually profited from or benefited from the crisis. They are winning still from the crisis. So this means that what this crisis has done was actually contra-selection, a natural contra-selection in the energy markets to favor the clean energy and to disfavor the bad energy. So also, because interest rates remain lower for a longer time due to the pandemic, this favors actually investments in investment-intensive renewable forms of energy, which means where you invest a big, but then you have your fuel for free. This is also why they were more resilient during the pandemic. Also, we saw a big shift from energy-intensive and emissions-intensive industries to digitalization-based businesses, the digital economy, the priority areas for a cleaner economy, so service-based economy. These are key winners of the whole pandemic and fast-forwarded a lot of the transition that we would have been doing, would have needed to do, but it was very difficult when you are so used to seeing your colleagues every day, when you're so used to business trips every week to another continent, then it's hard to say, oh, well, it's not responsible to do that. But COVID told us, well, don't do it, and we learned how to live without them. Mostly, not, of course, not fully, but a lot of things we have learned how to do with that. So, and finally, not finally, almost finally, we are spending an enormous amount on in the areas where the largest polluters and biggest leapfrogging opportunities. So countries are providing now stimulus packages in the order of 5 to 28% of their GDP to economic stimulus. A lot of this is related to energy. So and compared to that, investments of around just 2.5% of GDP would be sufficient to fix the climate crisis, of course, annually. So this means nothing as compared to what we are spending now. If we did nothing else, just devoted some of this, not only devoted this, just paid attention how we do this, we could solve the climate crisis. What an opportunity. And most people don't want to return to the old, but want the new normal, because the new normal is better. So let's not get back to normal, because normal wasn't working. Now, unfortunately, which I now didn't bring because I'm already well over my time, so these are my final slides, but unfortunately, the recent news shows that instead what has been happening is that, and if I do get the chance, I actually will show you. I didn't realize there are so many French on the call, because I do have a very good slide about what's happening with economic stimulus. Unfortunately, the bad news is that 52% of global stimulus money, so related to energy sector, is going to the fossil fuels. So what we are doing, we are forcing these old dead bodies on the ventilator and trying to resuscitate them and putting a lot of money into that, instead of giving that to the young and energetic and the future, instead of putting this money into the future. There are some which is only 35% with a lot of conditions. France is actually one of the better ones. It is putting a lot of, at least according to the G20 analysis, is putting a lot of money into stimulus money into green recovery in the energy sector, but it's still either smaller than the fossil support or conditional. And right now, the only country, according to the G20 analysis, which is putting much more, significantly more stimulus money into the future energy forms, green energy, than fossil, you wouldn't believe, but it is actually China. Anyway, even the Economist argues that we have to seize the moment. And what I want to argue, that the companies, the majority of the companies, the one way how we can almost all of us seize the moment very much is to embrace much more the digital economy and the digital transition that we have lived through during the crisis. And all of us are, or most companies are kind of going back to the old normal, but it would be extremely important to not go back to the old normal, but try to ride on this opportunity and try to preserve as much of the home officing, for example, or remote education, remote services, remote training, remote business trips and remote conferences, what we are doing, and so on, as much as possible. And that's our biggest, one of the biggest opportunity. But of course, policies should also encourage this. And this is also from the economists, which are already actually said that this process, the death of the office, has already actually started even before the pandemic. The pandemic only accelerated this process, but it's again a train to jump on rather to pull the brakes and try to go fast forward backwards. Yes, of course, it's not easy to change. And of course, I'm not arguing that this is no pain to anyone. Yes, change is always difficult. It always will have losers, unfortunately. But the good news is that in the end, there is room for the losers to find new economic opportunities and to become new winners. But they do have to change. So this was what I was going to say. And finally, it's really our decision. This may be our last opportunity that we are getting to really solve the climate change. And if we don't take this enormous opportunity that we got from the crisis, then I'm afraid that we may be putting only our consumption into Noah's Ark, and we are going to be left out of the ark that's going to sail into the future. Thank you very much for your attention. If you are interested, you are welcome to follow me on Twitter, Facebook. But maybe I will. And if you have questions, or if I have other people, I will be very happy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. As we mentioned, Professor Diana Ürge-Borsac is with us on behalf of the Central European University and also on behalf of IPCC. So if you have any questions, please use the chat box and write your questions there. Thank you. Now we should give a... Now we are just getting back to the presentation. Now we can skip this one. Oh, Joaria, too, can you please help us so that we can share our screen? And thank you.
Katarina.
Just a second.
You can try now. You have the hand.
Yeah.
Normally.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Okay, and now it's to Joaria too, please. Thank you. On behalf of the association Bilanc Carbone.
Okay. So now that the Professor Diana has presented us the global pathway and the way we have to take, I will make a little focus on the science-based targets called SBT. So in 2015, around 80% of the 500 largest companies adopted greenhouse gas emission reduction targets regarding the Paris Agreement and the 2-degree pathway. However, it's not possible to know on which global warming pathway all of these objectives are directing us. And the question is how to align business objectives with a global pathway limiting global warming to 2 degrees. Oh. Okay. And that is why the concept of the science-based targets aims to answer this question by proposing a methodology for developing a science-based objective, and that is to say, align the company's objective with the 2-degree pathway. And how do they define the SBT? SBT is on way when targets are considered if they match the level of decarbonization required to keep the global temperature rise below 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. So SBT is a grouping of methodology which have the common principle of identifying the remaining carbon budget so as not to exceed the 2-degree limit, and which allocates this carbon budget to different sectors of activities, taking into account the sectors, environmental approach, and also economic approach. So this initiative was launched by WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, the WRE, World Resources Institute, and the CDP. And the latter has also incorporated the concept. So the CDP has incorporated in its questionnaire the concept of SVT to rating the climate change questionnaire. The list of committed companies is available on their websites. And it's, as I say, big companies, more than 500 persons who are committed to these initiatives. But why do companies commit in this kind of initiatives? Setting long-term goals is one of the key pillars to develop carbon strategies, and defining science-based targets is a natural part of the diagnosis of greenhouse gas emission for to account company carbon footprints in order to all to anticipate and to project CO2 emissions in the future. Then to achieve a low carbon and resilient businesses in long term, they need to go further the accounting step. But we will have a more focus on different methodology and tool in the next webinar if you would like to know more about different tool and methodology using by company or organizations to reduce and define their low carbon strategies. You could move on the next slide. So as I said, SBT is pretty designed for big companies, but it's important for all size of companies to evaluate their carbon footprint. And we know that at a European level or regional or other, even at country level, we have a lot of program designed for big companies. So we have at European level the non-financial performance declaration, the NFPD, which come from a transcription of a European directive on extra financial reporting, which contain some declaration on company environmental impact, which is in the part of the CSR reporting system. And its goal is to constitute a strategic management tool for the company, focused on essential information, but not only financial information, but to have to take into account risk and opportunities linked to climate change and environmental impact. So the NFPD concerns large companies, mainly public limited companies, when they turn over some balance sheets and number of threshold. The NFPD concerns 4 axes, so the social, environmental, fight against corruption, but also human rights. And the list of elements concerned by the declaration notably incorporates measures. So it is important to have to adapt the consequences of climate change, reduction objectives set voluntarily by organization, and the medium and long term to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and the means also implemented by company to reach this objective, as well as actions aimed at combating climate change. The NFPD must be included in the management report of the organization and must also be published on the company website. And regarding the French the French specificity since end of 2011, 2012. There are specific regulations intended to big companies, more than 500 employees, to have to report the significant emissions every 3 or every 4 years with the design of the action plans to implement in the following years. But even that, most of programs for carbon for company for the calculation of organization carbon footprint is voluntarily, except of the ERI carbon market, which will be developed in the next slide. Okay. So the ERI carbon markets coming from the Kyoto Protocol, basically, and it will targeting the most emitting sectors, like energy productions, industrial companies, the most polluting industrial companies, to limit the level of emission, allowing them to have a budget. But as it is a market at a regional level, it is always possible to sell and to buy allowances when they are not used by companies within international credits. But now this market is very limited in terms of reducing CO2 emissions, because we know that the carbon prices is too low to have a real reductions. And today the global average is €2 per ton, and we need to have a very much higher price to be consistent with the 2-degree warming target. And for that, sorry, my microphone was, I lost my sound. So ERIC, the European Union is known to be a well dynamic region in the commitment on climate matter. And since many years now, we have some policies and regulations. And the main objective were and still be the reduction of our energy reliance, the transition to a fair and more resilient society. So the European Emission Trading Scheme, called ETS, is the EU's main tool for cutting GHG emissions, and was created in 2005. And it imposes a direct emission cap on the most emitting sectors and covers around 4,500% of emissions. And there are also existing climate and energy policies and political environment commitment, mainly in the EU countries, and we could find best practices, risk and constraints, and tailor-made solution to fit project countries and the EU, because sometimes we have really a gap between the project countries' realities and the EU's commitments. But potential target countries, according to a current level of best practices for reducing carbon footprint or installations, organization outside the ETS, so the less polluting organization might change their approach and adopt also a low carbon strategies. For example, in the United Kingdom, UK started to define governmental schemes since 2001 on climate change levy to restrict the energy sectors. And the first global national initiative was called Carbon Reductions Commitment, was launched in 2010. But this mandatory scheme targets only the energy use emissions, but around the 3,000 non-energy intensive businesses and sectors, public organizations are not covered by the EU ETS. Also in Sweden, you have energy and carbon taxes that was in the framework of the 203 European Union Energy Tax Directive, which sets a minimum rates for the taxation of energy projects in EU member states. And the main taxes on energy are for the fuel exercise and applies to most fuel as well as low blends of biofuels in gasoline and diesel. And the carbon dioxide tax was an explicit carbon tax, applies to most fossil fuel use as well as biofuel in gasoline and diesel. And also the use of electricity. So majority for taxes concerns the energy use and electricity productions. A last example was in the Netherlands, where the Dutch government taxes the use of electricity and natural gas that makes energy more expensive. So we have to have a balance with the social impact of that. But it encourages people to use less energy, and energy taxes is paid by the consumers to the energy suppliers, which in turn pays it to the tax of custom administration. So maybe further development of carbon taxes to take into account social impact will be developed through the Green Deal. But I think that Katalin will take some words about that in the next slide, as we will to have also a fair and resilient transitions, taking into account social impact for consumers. We know that it will not be easiest, but we know, as you can see, carbon tax is concerning most the energy production, and we really encourage through the approach to adopt to design low carbon transitions by each organization to take into account all emissions. So not only focused on the energy, but because most of the time 7% to 80% of companies' footprint is due to indirect emissions. So to take into account the use, the waste, the freight, and all activities beyond the productions.
Thank you very much, Joaria, too. If our audience has questions, then I'm encouraging you to please ask them in the chat box. And Joaria, too, was with us today from France on behalf of the association Bilan Carbone. Now it's back to Ms. Katalin Herner from KÖVET Association about the Green Deal.
Yes, thank you. I would like to tell you some words about the European Green Deal. So Ursula von der Leyen, on behalf of the European Commission, presented the European Green Deal at the beginning of this year. And what is it? It's in fact an action plan for how to be for Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So this is the aim, that not only the European Union but the continent would be climate neutral by that time. And how to do it? It's an action plan to boost the efficient use of resources by moving to a clean and circular economy in Europe, to restore biodiversity and cut pollution in Europe, and also the European Union should be a global leader in green economy to do that and to reach this aim by accelerating transition to renewables, increase energy efficiency, and invest in green mobility. It says that the European Green Deal will transform the way we live, the work and move, and it will change really a lot in our everydays. Therefore, the European Commission has prepared 3 concrete actions that will offer a strong basis for the new deal. First is the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan, which means that it's 1 trillion euros over the next decade will support to reach this aim. The second is the European Climate Law, which was launched this year in March. And the aim of this law is to make transition irreversible. So it's already can be read. It's already can be reached. You can read the details in this climate law. And also the third one is the Just Transition Fund, together with the European Investment Bank, which will help those who will have to take a bigger step, it says. So it's one very important principle is that they don't leave no one behind. So you can see here the European Green Deal, its main focusing on this achieving the climate neutrality by sustainable transport, transition to the circular economy, clean, reliable and affordable energy, farm to fork, which means that that agriculture should be also close to the consumers and close to the sustainable way. And it's also, as I told, a very important principle that leave no one behind. So the European Investment Bank and this Just Transition Fund will help to those countries in Europe who has to take bigger actions. So this is more or less about European Green Deal. I encourage you to read this climate law. It's really interesting, and we will live with this within the next decades, I'm sure. So thank you very much for the attention, and then we would like you to give your opinion about it with Mentimeter. Katinka will tell about it.
Yes. So at the end of the presentations, we prepared some questions for you. So if you use your browser and you log on to www.menti.com, that's menti.com, and you enter the code that you can see here, that's 7821032, then we will be able to see the questions, and it's an interactive surface, so we will see your answers straight away. I will just take a second to be able to show this to you. So oh. Oh. Okay, so we can see
some of you
that there were some. Okay, there are already some answers coming in. So the first question was, what comes to your mind when you hear or read about climate change? And as you can see, it's a word cloud. So the more people give that particular answer, the bigger that word becomes. Urgency, we can see that's coming in quite often, and also challenge. So we have already got 20 answers at the moment. We will wait a few more seconds to give you some time to enter your votes, your words, and you can give up to 3 answers actually, so not just 1, but if you feel you can enter more, up to 3, but one is also fine. Emergency, global warming.
With the PPT slides, you will get the results also of this Mentimeter, so you will be able to read all these answers.
Okay, we have 27 answers just now.
Energy, global warming, emergency, threat, crisis, loss of biodiversity.
Yeah, but urgent is still the most significant word in this word.
Of course, there is no good answer and bad answer.
Obviously not.
All the answers are very good.
Yes, and this is true for all the questions that we prepared for you today. There are no good or bad answers. We were just curious to find out about your ideas and your thoughts. Okay, at the moment we've got 90 participants, 90 attendees in our webinar, and we already received 34 answers. We will maybe wait.
You can go on. I think it's
okay.
You can still give an answer for the first one.
We are moving on to the second one, but if you can join in later on, that's not a problem. You can still join in. Okay, so there's the next question. That's a personal question. Do you think you are doing everything you can? Are you trying to improve or looking for information to reduce your carbon emission? So the first one is basically, this is part of your everyday life, or the second one is you are trying to improve. The last one is not a bad answer either. If you're looking for information and looking to see what you can do to contribute to reduce the carbon emission of for everybody on a global scale. Also, just obviously to start on the individual level.
There are several carbon footprint calculators available via internet. It's also on the GFN webpage, and also our webpage we will renew it within some weeks. So you can check how big is your carbon footprint with its carbon footprint calculators.
Yes, and we can see we already have 37 answers, which is more than for the previous question. Thank you. And you can see most of those who gave an answer said that it's either part of their everyday life or they are trying to do their best to improve in this. Can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so who do you think can do the most for climate change mitigation? Now you should be able to create a rank in terms of governments, profit-oriented organizations, NGOs, educational institutions, and individuals. Oh, lovely. We've got some answers coming in already. And so far, governments are in the first place. Okay, so still the governments are in the first place, first position, and we already have 35 answers. So according to your answers today, those 36 people who have answered, the governments are in the first place to be able to do most for climate change mitigation.
And then the individuals which is very interesting answer.
In second.
So all of us has the responsibility for that.
Yes, basically we are all, and we have 41 answers just now. So I think we can move on to the next slide. Yes. Can the EU reach carbon neutrality by 2050, in your opinion? What do you think? Yes, with a lot of effort, partly.
So this Green Deal can be fulfilled or not?
Or is it not possible at all? In the meantime, let me just tell you that as we already promised, you will get the presentations sent to you, to everybody who has registered for today.
And the results of this.
And the results of this Mentimeter voting. It is totally live. It is just according to your answers coming in just right now. Okay, we already have 38 answers. So with a lot of effort, that's coming in second, but most of the people said it's partly reachable. Okay, can we move on?
Yes.
What can we do to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius as it appears in the Paris Agreement? So if you could just give some ideas, this would just come up as speech bubbles. So this time not in a word cloud, but just like bubbles. If you have any ideas on this, so what can we do? On a personal level, did we mean here? Reduce transportation. Carbon tax. Yes, we've got some answers already coming in, as you can see in these boxes. Consume less, produce less. Be confident with scientists. Soft mobility, zero waste, education, carbon tax again. Force companies to reduce their emissions, rethink economic objectives, strong climate regulations on private companies, massive public debate to accept necessity for degrowth. Just wondering if I can scroll down, because we already have 25. Oh, that's me. Yeah, I'm showing you the other answers as well. So we've got another carbon tax, real estate renovation, no more fossil energy, circular economy, stop using planes, have a vegetarian diet, carbon tax, less consumption, raise awareness. Reward individuals who decrease their CO2 footprint. So you can see the answers coming in. To live consciously, change consumption behavior, implementing governmental measures. Some of the ideas that are just coming in. Yes, we are moving on to the next slide. Please give us one initiative about climate change and low carbon transition that is ongoing in your country. So now we've got basically Hungary and France, but we might have some
Romania as well.
Romanian, yes, we have Romanian participants, attendees as well. So if you could give us or list some initiatives. Again, these will come up in these boxes or speech bubbles. We don't have too many questions left. I will just let you know. Just two more. Car sharing, CO2 capitation plan. Forbid short flights, finance the use of bikes. Green cities policy, solar energy. Fridays for Future. Earth Hour.
We don't have, that's
Nuclear energy. Investing in hydrogen. Greenhouse program. No, we don't have.
Energy efficiency.
Carpooling, carbon tax, recycling.
Earth Hour.
Thank you. Nuclear energy. Yeah, just two more slides. Yeah, we already have like 16, 18 answers. Recycling, that's in the center that several attendees answered. We don't have. Net zero initiative, investing in hydrogen, railway investment. You can see the answers here. Teleworking.
Not much.
10 million trees planting. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay, so last but one slide. Was the subject of this webinar familiar to you? So when you signed up for participating, very familiar with the topic? Okay, so yes, partly or no. Already a lot of answers came in, 34 altogether, 35, and most of you were already familiar with the topic.
Yeah,
Thank you.
All experts.
Yes. Thank you very much. And we are moving on to the last slide, that is, what elements of this presentation should we explore in future webinars in more detail, obviously. So could you give us some of your thoughts, ideas that you would love us to talk about in more detail, the notion of carbon budget?
Yeah, we talked about carbon budget, science-based targets, carbon tax, Green Deal. So the next webinar 2 and webinar 3, we can go into detail in some of the topics if you wish. That's why we ask this.
Carbon tax, carbon budget, IPCC scenarios. Yes, basically the second webinar in a week's time will be about the tools for carbon footprint organizations, where we will talk about carbon reporting, mandatory reporting, and CDP, that's carbon disclosure project, carbon footprint in ISO 14064 and 14067, sectoral budget and SBT, and the bill on carbon methodology and tools. And that will be those will be the topics in our next webinar. And the third one will basically concentrate on low carbon strategy to lower emissions by action plan and SBT, carbon neutrality and long-term strategy. We will talk about, but these pieces of information that I just quickly told you about just now are available on your registration pages. So we can see the answers that just came in, lows, tools.
We read through it, yeah.
So thank you very much for your answers to your questions that we prepared for you today. Yes, and now if we could ask everybody to switch on your cameras, please. We would like to take just a photo to see who were present today with us, those 70 people who are still with us today. So just now, please feel free to switch on your cameras, and we will just take a photo. Thank you.
We encourage you to do that.
Yes.
Take your photo just for a minute.
Just to see how international and how many of us we were here today.
It's good to see you all.
Okay, so I will just take one just now, and if some more people turn on their cameras, then we will do
green screen as well. We can do
again. Okay, thank you very much. Now,
and then we can go back to that. Thank you.
Just a second. Yeah, but then I have to stop this.
Yeah.
We'll just go back to our presentation. If you give me a second. Yes, here we go. So, upcoming events that I just told you about, the second and the third webinar in 1 week and 2 weeks time. We will send you this presentation, so you will be able to register for the other two if you haven't done so yet. But if you have already done so, then it's already fine. And also we are preparing a carbon footprint training, and we will give more information about that soon on the KÖVET website.
It will be also a kind of webinar, the carbon footprint training.
Okay, so thank you for your attention. We will just quickly take a look at the questions that came in the chat box.
It was more about the presentations and that you can have it, of course.
Okay. I'm afraid you were too shy to ask questions in the chat box, but I'm still encouraging you to do so.
Or for the next time, the next webinar.
You can also send your questions to the contact, to either of the contact emails, to either KÖVET or to the Association Bilan Carbone, and we will do our best to answer them.
Yes, I think we will add the contact at the end of the PowerPoint, maybe in this slide.
Yes.
If
The
you
last
have,
slide is about the contact points and the
if it's
references.
general question, we will answer and send it to you with the presentation. And if it's personal question, we will answer by email. Okay, perfect.
Yes, then thank you for now. Thank you for your attention, and then welcome for the next webinar next week.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have
for
a
your
good day all.
attention. And we will see you hopefully next week.
Yes.
At the second webinar. Thank you. Have a good day and take care of yourself. Bye now.
Bye.